The ranch was louder than usual that evening, but not in a reckless way. Laughter rolled across the open land, mixing with country music and the steady crackle of a fire pit. Pickup trucks were lined neatly along the fence, boots kicked off near the porch, badges clipped discreetly to belts instead of uniforms. It was supposed to be a low-key get-together. No speeches. No ranks. Just people who worked hard all week finally exhaling in a place that felt safe. My ranch had always been that place. It sat well outside the HOA boundary, a detail I had confirmed more times than I could count. Different jurisdiction, different rules, different world. That separation was intentional. I bought the land because I wanted space, privacy, and peace, 3 things HOAs never seemed to respect. The party wasn't wild. No fireworks. No shouting. Just a few grills going, kids running around the open field, and a group of off-duty officers enjoying a rare night where no one was calling them for help. Irony, as it turned out, had a sense of humor. I noticed her before anyone else did. She stood at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, phone already in her hand. HOA Karen. The president, of course. Perfect posture, tight smile, eyes scanning the scene like she was taking inventory. She didn't belong there and she knew it, but that had never stopped her before. I stepped away from the porch and walked toward her, keeping my tone neutral. "Can I help you?" She didn't answer right away. She glanced at the trucks, the people, the music. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This is an unauthorized gathering," she said finally. "You're in violation of multiple HOA noise and occupancy rules." I almost laughed. Almost. "This property isn't part of your HOA," I said calmly. "You know that." She scoffed. "It affects the community. That makes it our business." Behind me, the music dipped lower as people noticed the tension. Conversation slowed. A few heads turned. Officers, even off-duty ones, have a sixth sense for scenes about to go sideways. "I'm asking you to leave," I said. Her eyes flashed. "You don't get to tell me what to do." That's when she stepped back, lifted her phone, and turned away slightly, just enough to perform for an audience. "I'm calling 911, she announced loudly. "There's an illegal party happening. I feel unsafe." The word unsafe hung in the air, ridiculous and heavy. Several people exchanged looks. One officer near the grill raised an eyebrow. Another took a slow sip of his drink, suddenly very interested in how this would unfold. She spoke into the phone with practiced urgency. "Yes, this is the HOA president. There's a large, out-of-control gathering on private property. Loud music. Trespassing. I believe alcohol is involved." She shot me a smug glance, like she'd just checkmated me. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't argue. I didn't even correct her lies. I just watched, hands in my pockets, as she confidently set the wheels in motion. What she didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the party she was so eager to shut down wasn't full of random civilians. It was full of officers. From my department. And the call she'd just made was about to boomerang in the most spectacular way possible. The music stopped completely now. The fire crackled. Conversations died. Everyone waited. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. And HOA Karen smiled, convinced she was about to win. The sirens grew louder with every passing second, cutting through the quiet like a blade. HOA Karen stood a little taller as they approached, shoulders back, chin high, soaking in the attention. This was her moment. The climax she'd been building toward ever since she'd spotted the party lights from her perfectly trimmed cul-de-sac. I glanced around the yard. The reaction wasn't panic. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to curiosity. A few people quietly set their drinks down. Someone nudged a cooler farther from the fire pit. One officer leaned over and whispered, "Well, this should be interesting." Another smiled, slow and knowing. Karen noticed none of it. She was too busy rehearsing her victim's speech. The first patrol car rolled up the drive, lights flashing but siren off. Then another. Tires crunched on gravel. Doors opened. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, scanning the scene like they always did. Automatically, professionally. Karen rushed forward before anyone else could speak. "Thank goodness you're here," she said, voice shaking just enough to sound afraid. "This man is hosting an illegal party. Loud noise, alcohol everywhere, people trespassing." I felt threatened. One of the officers nodded politely. "Ma'am, who's the property owner?" She pointed at me without hesitation.
Him.
"He's refusing to comply with HOA rules." The officer turned toward me, and then he stopped. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a pause that lasted half a second too long. His eyes flicked from my face to the ranch behind me, then back to me again. "Evening, sir," he said carefully. "Evening," I replied. Behind him, the second officer had also recognized me. I saw it in the way his posture shifted, the way his expression softened from enforcement mode to something more familiar. Karen didn't notice. She barreled on. "This gathering violates noise ordinances and HOA regulations. I want it shut down immediately." The first officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, are you aware whose property this is?" "Yes," she snapped. "And he's out of compliance." The officer hesitated, then chose his words with care. "Ma'am, this ranch belongs to—" I stepped forward. "It's mine." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "That doesn't change anything." A murmur rippled through the crowd behind me. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. The second officer glanced past Karen and finally took in the people standing around the fire pit. His eyes widened slightly as recognition hit. One by one, faces clicked into place. Men and women he'd worked shifts with. Trained with.
Trusted.
He muttered. Karen followed his gaze, confused. "Why are they staring at you like that?" He didn't answer. Instead, he keyed his radio. "Dispatch, can you confirm the call origin?" Karen crossed her arms. "Are you going to do your job or not?" The first officer turned back to her. "Ma'am, this call was logged as a noise complaint. There's no ordinance violation at this hour." "There are children present," she protested. "Yes," he said calmly. "With their parents. On private property." Her voice rose. "This is HOA land." "No," he replied. "It isn't." The second officer stepped closer to me and lowered his voice. "Sir, should I call the captain?" I smiled slightly. "Might be a good idea." Karen heard that. "Why would you call the captain?" she demanded. "This is a simple enforcement issue." The officer looked at her, then at me, then back at her again. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "the people at this party are from our department." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "That's irrelevant." "It's not," he said. "And there's more." She stared at him, waiting. He gestured around the yard. "This isn't just any ranch." The realization hadn't fully landed yet, but it was getting closer. And when it did, it was going to hit hard. The moment stretched longer than it should have. HOA Karen stood there, arms still crossed, confidence wobbling but not yet gone. She was the kind of person who believed authority existed simply because she said it did. And, in her world, backing down wasn't an option. It was a weakness. "Even if they're officers," she said sharply, "this gathering is still illegal. Uniform or not, rules apply to everyone." The first officer took a slow breath. "Ma'am, no one is disputing that. But there are no laws being broken here."
She scoffed.
"You're biased. You know him." "Yes," he replied. "We do." That finally caught her attention. "Excuse me?" The second officer spoke this time. "Ma'am, the property owner is." I held up a hand gently.
"Not yet."
Karen's voice climbed higher. "This is exactly the problem with small towns. Favoritism. Abuse of power. I want a supervisor. Now." A few people behind me shifted. Someone muttered, "Oh, she really doesn't know." Another tried and failed to suppress a grin. The first officer nodded into his radio. "Dispatch. Request supervisor on scene." Karen smiled, triumphant again.
"Good."
"Because this is unacceptable." While we waited, she turned toward the crowd like she was addressing a courtroom. "Everyone here is trespassing. I suggest you leave before this gets worse." No one moved. A few officers folded their arms. One leaned against a truck, completely relaxed. Another shook his head slowly, like he was watching a slow-motion car crash. Sirens sounded again, closer this time. A single vehicle pulled in, a marked unit, followed by an unmarked SUV. The supervisor stepped out, scanning the scene with practiced efficiency. "What do we have?" he asked. The officers began explaining. Karen cut in immediately. "Thank goodness. This man is hosting an illegal party on HOA land. I called 911 because I felt unsafe." The supervisor looked at her, then at me. His eyebrows lifted. "Evening," he said. "Didn't expect to see you tonight." "Wasn't planning on it," I replied. Karen blinked. "You know him too?" The supervisor glanced around at the crowd, recognition dawning in layers. "Looks like half my department's here." "That's not relevant," she snapped. He turned back to her. "It is when you call 911 claiming a dangerous situation." Her posture stiffened. "I was threatened." "By whom?" he asked. She pointed at me. "Him." The supervisor studied me for a long second. "He threatened you?" "No," she hesitated. "But his presence." "That's not how emergency calls work," he said calmly. Her face flushed. "So you're all protecting him?" "No," he replied. "We're clarifying facts." He gestured toward the house, the trucks, the families. "This is private property. Outside HOA jurisdiction. Within county regulations. No noise violation. No criminal activity." She opened her mouth to argue again, but he continued. "And," he added, "you called 911 under false pretenses." That word landed hard. "False," she whispered. "Yes," he said. "Which is serious." The crowd was silent now. Even the fire seemed to crackle quieter. She shook her head. "I was enforcing community standards." "You don't have authority here," the supervisor said. "And you don't get to use emergency services to settle HOA disputes." Her eyes darted around, searching for support. There was none. The supervisor turned to me. "Do you want to file a complaint?" I considered it for a moment. The way she stood there, small now, stripped of certainty. The way the power dynamic had flipped completely. "Not tonight," I said. "I just want her to leave." The supervisor nodded. "Ma'am, you're done here." Karen's lips trembled. "This isn't over." He met her gaze evenly. "Actually, it is." She turned and walked back toward the road, heels crunching against gravel, every step heavier than the last. Behind her, the ranch breathed again. And the lesson was finally unavoidable. She had called 911 expecting backup. Instead, she had walked straight into accountability. Karen didn't leave gracefully. She walked away stiff-backed, shoulders tight, foam clenched in her hand like it had betrayed her. The crunch of gravel under her heels echoed louder than it should have, every step punctuated by the reality she was still trying to outrun. When she reached the edge of the drive, she stopped, turned, and looked back one last time, like she expected someone to call her back, to restore the authority she'd lost. No one did. The supervisor watched her go, then turned back to the officers. "All right," he said calmly, "let's reset this." The tension drained almost instantly. Conversations restarted in low murmurs. Someone let out a breath they'd clearly been holding. The fire pit popped, sparks rising into the darkening sky. It was amazing how quickly a space could feel normal again once entitlement left it. The supervisor pulled me aside. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I said. Just surprised she actually called 911. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Happens more than you'd think. People confuse inconvenience with danger." He explained that the call had already been flagged. Claiming fear without evidence, exaggerating circumstances, misusing emergency services. It all went into the report. Nothing dramatic tonight, but documentation mattered. Patterns mattered. "She's going to get a follow-up," he said. "At minimum." I nodded. That was enough. One of the officers approached, shaking his head. "Sir, we honestly thought this was going to be a joke call." "It kind of was," I replied. He grinned.
"Yeah.
Just not the way she planned." The supervisor addressed the group briefly. "Appreciate everyone staying calm. No issues here." Enjoy your night." A few quiet chuckles followed him as he returned to his vehicle. Patrol cars rolled out one by one, lights off now, blending back into the night. The sound of engines faded, replaced by music clicking back on at a lower volume. The party resumed, but something had shifted. People kept glancing toward the driveway, half expecting Karen to reappear with reinforcements or paperwork or another bad idea. She didn't. Instead, what lingered was a shared understanding that power, when challenged by reality, collapses fast. Later that evening, as plates were cleared and kids grew sleepy, a couple of officers sat near the porch with me. One of them shook his head slowly. She really thought calling 911 would work.
She always does, I said.
That's the problem. Another officer leaned back in his chair. You know this is going to spread, right? I figured. Good, he said, because people like that rely on silence. The fire burned lower. Crickets took over where laughter had been. One by one, trucks pulled out, taillights disappearing down the long drive. Handshakes. Quiet thanks. Normal goodbyes. By the time the last guest left, the ranch was still again. I walked the perimeter, checking the gate, listening to the night sounds settle back into place. Everything was as it should be. No damage. No chaos. Just land and quiet and the faint smell of smoke in the air. Inside, my phone buzzed. An email. From the HOA. Subject line. Incident report. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what it would say. Carefully worded concern. Vague references to misunderstandings. An attempt to reclaim dignity after losing it in public. It would pretend the night hadn't unfolded exactly the way it had. But the truth didn't need their approval. Karen had tried to flex power she didn't have, in a place where it didn't apply, against people who understood authority better than she ever would. And she'd done it on record. As I turned off the porch light and closed the door, one thought settled comfortably in my mind. She hadn't just embarrassed herself. She taught the entire HOA a lesson they wouldn't forget. The next morning was quiet in the way only rural land ever is after a long night. Sunlight rolled across the pasture in slow waves, lighting up the fence lines, the barn roof, the dew clinging to the grass. Birds moved freely where panic had been just hours earlier. If you hadn't been there, you never would have guessed law enforcement had filled the driveway the night before. I made coffee and finally opened the email. It was exactly what I expected. Polite.
Detached.
Carefully sanitized. The HOA regretted the misunderstanding. They referenced a concern raised by a community member and assured me they were reviewing internal communication procedures. Not a single apology. Not a single name. Just corporate fog meant to blur responsibility. I forwarded it to legal counsel and archived it. Documentation mattered. Patterns mattered. By mid-morning, my phone started buzzing. Not with apologies, but with questions. Neighbors. Landowners. Even a few people who'd quietly tolerated Karen for years. Is it true she called 911 on your place? I heard the cops showed up and backed you. Did she really try to claim your ranch? I didn't embellish. I didn't rant. I just told the truth. And that was enough. Within days, the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting. Not for me, for her. Misuse of emergency services wasn't something they could spin away. Neither was the growing paper trail, nor the fact that multiple officers had now personally witnessed her behavior. She didn't attend the meeting. She sent a letter instead. It was defensive, emotional, full of blame. She accused others of undermining community safety and claimed she'd been disrespected. But buried in the noise was fear. Real fear. Because for the first time, the system she'd leaned on was looking back at her with questions. A week later, another email arrived. Karen had been removed from her position. No ceremony. No announcement. Just a quiet line at the bottom of a newsletter about leadership restructuring. The ranch stayed quiet. Peaceful. Untouched. But something else changed too. HOA notices stopped coming. Complaints vanished. The drive-by inspections ended. The unannounced visits never resumed. It was as if a pressure valve had finally been released. Power thrives in intimidation. It collapses under sunlight. One afternoon, I ran into the supervisor from that night at a local store. He nodded, smiled slightly. "Things calmed down?" he asked. "Completely." "Good," he said. "They usually do once people realize calling 911 isn't a cheat code." We both laughed. That night, sitting on the porch, watching the sky fade from orange to deep blue, I thought about how close things had come to spiraling, not because of danger, but because of ego. One person convinced that authority was something you could declare instead of earn. Karen never apologized. She never reached out. She didn't have to. Her absence said more than words ever could. The ranch remained mine. The land remained quiet. And the community learned something important. Authority isn't volume, paperwork, or threats. It's responsibility, accountability, knowing when you don't have jurisdiction, and backing down when you're wrong. Calling 911 didn't make her powerful. It made everything visible. And once it was visible, it was over. I turned off the porch light, the same way I always did, listening to the night settle into itself. No sirens. No shouting. No false emergencies. Just peace. Exactly the way it was supposed to be.